Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
My wife went out and started my truck this morning. It said 102 inside the truck. Summer is definitely coming here. And by the time it really gets set in, I'll be looking for ice and snow in December and February to be here. I tell you the truth, I love the change of seasons. When it's hot, I'm ready for it to be fall. I'm ready for it to be winter. Now I'm ready for spring to get here and roll back around to, well, it's 100 degrees outside and I'm having to be out in it every day. Yesterday it got very warm yesterday. I have to admit, I called my wife and I said, baby, can you bring me one of those large strawberry slushies from the Sonic? They're full of fruit, full of strawberries. They really help me to cool off when I'm outside in the heat. But it's getting hot. Everybody just get ready for it because it's on its way. It's been a trying week for me here this week. I've been working a job in town in Cabot, and it has not been coming together very well. And I got so aggravated Thursday, I just left because they didn't have everything in place that needed to be put in place. And the due date on it was yesterday. And how they all managed to pull it together, I do not know. There was a lot of cable missing in a lot of locations. I got very upset. I'm supposed to be splicing these ends together, and they're not pulled together. There's nothing there. And I got very outspoken and spoke out against them. And looking back on that this morning, like even late yesterday, they really put the pressure on me and caused me to have to work as late as I did yesterday. I thought, I did not really display a good Christian behavior in how I behaved about it, or how I became very outspoken against them on them having drugged their feet so long to get it done. And despite whose fault it might have been one way or the other, I know that it was part of me in my own behavior and not thinking, I shouldn't have spoke out like I did. One of the things, and you may not believe it, I was once red-headed, and I had a very hot temper, and I would speak out, I would behave out, very hot-headed. I admired my father so much and how patient a man that he really was. Now, I was about 18 years old. I had a fistful of firecrackers. He was sitting in the kitchen drinking coffee, hadn't been up very long. I eased up behind him, not thinking very clearly, obviously, or just being an 18-year-old kid. And I lit a firecracker with a very short fuse right behind him, expecting it to startle him and jump and get a big laugh out of it. All I seen him do was tense up. And it took a very long second for that man to stand up, turn around, and reach out very slowly and grab me by my throat and get right in my face and told me, he said, "Do not ever do that again." Now, the look on his face was not one I'd seen before. And granted, I'd gotten in trouble from my father many times, believe it or not. But he had the look on his face, and it did not dawn on me until some years later that he had been through Vietnam, and that probably was not the right thing for somebody to do to somebody that had been through Vietnam. And I regretted, and I still regret it now looking back on it, but my father was a very, very patient man, even in how he dealt with other people. And that's one of the qualities he had that I admire. One of the fruits of the Spirit is patience, and it's something that has been hard for me to really develop it. But over the course of time, I have worked to develop some of that patience. And I deal with things a little bit better than what I would have as a younger person. And some of that comes with age, but I think a lot more of it as I watch and look at how I actually develop, that is through the fruits of the Spirit. I did not behave this week as a good Christian in how I was working through this week, even though the heat was on, from not only trying to get everything accomplished yesterday that needed to be accomplished, but the heat got very hot outside also. And I thought this morning, that's not good Christian behavior. And Webster defines a Christian as a follower of Christ, a religious concept. Christianity itself is considered a religious concept. We're in here because we follow this religious concept of Christianity. We're in here today because we really do define ourselves as Christians. Now, as Christians and Christianity, we follow a certain way of life. Tomorrow will be Pentecost. Tomorrow we will go do what it says in the Bible and keep that holy day, that way of life. And developing patience as I've had to, and looking back and things in my past, I'm trying to develop that patience in dealing with people and dealing with others to follow this religious concept. Apostle Paul, or the rulers back during Apostle Paul's time, defined Christianity as a distinct lifestyle. Paul, having been under house arrest, defended his way of life, this Christian way. Before Felix, the procurator of Judea, Paul said these words in Acts 24:14, and we'll turn there. But this I confess unto you, that after the way, which they call heresy, so worship I the God of my fathers, believing all things which are written in the law and in the prophecies, in the prophets. Felix, having heard this, in verse 22, heard these things in verse 22, and when Felix heard these things, having more knowledge of that way, he deferred them. Those that wanted to persecute Paul, deferred them. He put them off. Now, book of Acts is the beginning of the New Testament church. It's the things that the New Testament church began with. It's what we here are not only begin with, but all the way of life and the roots of this way of life are also in the Old Testament. They're defined clearly in the Ten Commandments. Those definitions in the Ten Commandments are also broke down on the proper way to live your life. The key to good health in the food laws in Leviticus 11. The key to abundant or wealthy living. I mean, I'm not saying we're all billionaires or millionaires, but I know in my home, we do not want for anything. I mean, everything's there. Whether we realize we have it or not, we may not have a whole lot of money, but look around, we've got plenty in our cabinets. And we're not hurting for an air conditioner this time of year. Oh, that's great. And I'm thankful to have it, because we try to live according to these original roots established in the Old Testament. The Ten Commandments, the tithing laws, good health, eating properly, learning to get along with our neighbor. Christ established this, or not established it. I want to say Christ reestablished this in John 15:10. Well, let's go to John 14:15. Christ said, if you love me, keep my commandments. His commandments were love God and love your neighbor as yourself. And if you do so, that defines every one of the 10 commandments. Love God. You're not going to take his name in vain. You're not going to have idol worship. Love your neighbor. You're not going to steal, lie, commit adultery, covet. It's well defined. It's the key to living that way of life. This religious concept that we have to be here on a Saturday, on a Sabbath day that defines us as being different also from the world, that locks us into the fact that we are God's people. We're different from the world. We're living a religious concept. I look back on my behavior, and I could have done a little bit more. I probably could have, when I was younger, I could probably have found a better way to have a joke on my father that's really over 45 some odd years has stood out so well in my mind that I can still remember the expression on his face. And he's been gone over 25 years, but it still sticks with me. The patience that I've developed today, which I feel is through the fruits of the Spirit, through God's Spirit, and how to deal with people. Now that, well, I'm still redheaded, but it's just turning white. But I really bite my tongue a little bit more in how I talk to people and how I push them to do more, and not being so angry and not just telling them you can't do this, you're out of here, or getting frustrated and shoving them aside and doing it myself. I have developed a lot more patience. And I hope that's come with the age, but I honestly believe it's come with God's Spirit, because a lot of people don't develop that patience when they get older. It sticks with them. But in closing, I'd like to look at Colossians 3. And remind everyone, we are led by God's Spirit. We are begotten people, begotten Christians. And Paul talked of that in Romans 8, verses 14. But here I'm going to ask you in verse 12, the 3 Colossians, put on therefore as the elect of God. And I'm going to call this godly wisdom that we are trying to develop here. Holy and beloved bowels of mercy, kindness, humbleness of mind, meekness, long-suffering. Sounds a little bit like the fruits of the Spirit, doesn't it? Forbearing one another, forgiving one another, if any man have a quarrel against any, even as Christ forgave you, so also do you. And sometimes it's hard when people are running around in all different directions, and I'm thinking, man, this is not going to come together. I am wasting my time. I am losing money here. I've got to make this guy's payroll on top of making payroll for myself, and it's just not happening. But I could have probably done a little bit better in my own behavior. And above all things, put on charity. Love. Put on love, which is the bond of perfectness. And let the peace of God rule in your hearts, to the which also you are called in one body. This body right here of people that are gathered together today. And be you thankful. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly in all wisdom, teaching and admonishing one another in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, singing with grace in your hearts to the Lord. We just did that. We're working a religious concept. Christian, Christ followers.